Hi everyone, Trevor here. We're going to go over how to set up your very own RustDesk standalone server. We're going to use Microsoft's Hyper-V for our hypervisor of choice. We're going to use Ubuntu Server 22 long-term servicing branch. We're going to go over all the different things that are required, firewall rules, setting up the DNS, and all that. So let's get started. So here's my DNS. If I don't have an A record set up, I would want to set one up. However, if I have an A record already set up, which I do, and I wanted to create another one for, let's just say I want to call it service, I would want to set up a CNAME that points to my already existing A record. So for updating my A record, I'm using pfSense with dynamic DNS with my web host. So when my firewall's IP updates, it connects to my web host and updates my A record there so that it points to the right spot. And I have NAT rules and firewall rules for getting this set up. So let's have a look at the NAT. I have a WAN rule with RustDesk ports. Goes to the RustDesk server IP. And I have firewall rules. So you can see I have two rules. One that has the 2115, 2119, and then port 8000 on its own. For whatever reason, I had to split them up. I couldn't combine them, though you should be able to combine them into a single rule. Also, another weird kind of instance thing is I also had to create a floating rule for it. And you can see that the port 8000 floating rule is in use. Though this shouldn't be required, but I had to set it up, so just so you know. This is probably something you may also need to set up for your firewall. And just so you can have a look, here is the DNS, dynamic DNS setup on my pfSense box. So it just does it via web API. I have to put in a username and password, and it will automatically update my web host with my server's IP address. So one of the things I really want to emphasize is you kind of have to plan this all out before you even start configuring your server. Set up your IP, get all your networking done first, then install your machine. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and get this done. So I'm going to call it RustDesk. It's going to be a Generation 2 VM, 4 gigs of RAM. I'm going to set it for my internal network. So now I'm going to set up the virtual hard disk to be 60 gigabytes because this is going to be a very minimal server. We're going to just be installing the Ubuntu Firewall and Vim, along with PowerShell and SSH. And then we're going to hit finish. Going to go into the settings. For our security mode, we're going to want to have Windows UEFI security certificate and enable the trusted platform module. I'm going to set the minimum amount of RAM to 4 gigs, go to a maximum of 8 gigs of RAM. And I have enabled dynamic memory management and give it 2 processors. And that should be all we need. So we'll connect and we'll get this machine installed. Okay, we want to install the live server. Okay, so we're going to select English. I'm going to continue and update to the new installer. English layout. And I'm going to select Ubuntu server minimized. Now I just want to remind everyone that for the IP address, I have statically set the IP address in my firewall for this specific machine for when I do the install. So when it pulls the IP address, it's getting it already set up in the firewall. That way then when we go to install RustDesk, we can just use our DNS. This way then we don't have to try and muck around with settings after we do the install for changing the DNS name or the IP, anything like that, which will screw up how RustDesk connects. Now I just set up the disk without LVM. That's just how I prefer it, but you can set up the disk however you'd like. Now I'm going to just put in my credentials for the server. I am naming the server RustDesk for myself for obvious reasons. Installing the OpenSSH server, and I'm going to select the live patch and PowerShell as well. And now we'll just wait for it to install. We have all our base software installed and updated. Now we're going to install the firewall, and then I like Vim, so I'm going to also want to install Vim. You don't need to, but for the purposes of this video, I am installing Vim. This will just take a minute. And now that that is all done, in the description, there's a link for RustDesk. It is a GitHub repository from Techahold. You will want to use that as your guide. We need to allow SSH access from our workstation, in which case my workstation. It'll be different for your network, so please make sure you update that to the proper IP address that you require. Okay, so once we've updated our SSH port, we'll add all the RustDesk ports, which is what we saw before, the 21.115 to 21.119 TCP, 21.116 UDP, and port 8000 TCP. So now we're going to install RustDesk. To do that, use the URL provided in the description. It's the GitHub user content, 1986 RustDesk install. It's a shell script. And from there, it'll auto-load everything that we need. And we'll be asked two questions. One about setting up IP or DNS, and then the other for installing an HTTP server. So here we are with the domain. So I'm going to go rustdesk.domain. It might take a minute or two for the relay to come up. Once it does, it'll ask about the HTTP server. We want to select yes, because it's a lot easier to grab the key from the PowerShell or shell script that is provided by the system than it is to write it down from this console. Because if you don't do the install from SSH, it's a little difficult to copy and paste. So now that that is done, I'm going to access the website that's loaded with RustDesk, and I'm going to download the PowerShell script to grab the key. So when I open that up, I'm going to copy and paste the public key for the client. Now note, on the bottom of my connection, it says ready for a faster connection. Please set up your own server. So here is where we put in our information we set up. So the ID server is going to be rustdesk.domain, whatever your domain happens to be. The relay server is going to be exactly the same. rustdesk.domain. And the API server is going to be HTTP rustdesk.domain port 8000, and then the key is going to be the key we got from the PowerShell file. And then when we hit apply, if we go back to our home settings, you can see that it just says ready. We no longer get an alert asking us to create our own server for a faster connection. And that is how to set up a RustDesk server from start to finish using Microsoft Hyper-V and Ubuntu Server 2022 LTS. If you like or found this video useful, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks very much.